Hey guys, John with the Bow Trader Podcast here. Wanted to thank you for joining us on the podcast. We are starting off a brand new season, the 2025 podcast recording season. We're going to be dropping episodes on a more regular basis. We're excited to get this back going again, and it's going to be much the same as what we've done in the past. We're going to be talking about archery hunting. We're going to be talking about shooting bows, setting up new equipment. We're going to be talking about what it's like getting out in the field, how to interact with others, interacting with God in our vertical relationship with Him, the creator of the universe that wants to have a relationship with each one of us. So those are the things we're going to be talking about. We're excited that you're joining us, exciting that you're listening. We want you to share your feedback with us. Let us know what you want to hear, what topics you want us to cover, and we're just super excited that we get to share this time with you. So buckle up, enjoy the ride. Another cool morning. It's going to be a beautiful day. It's what it's looking like outside.
We've actually had a winter.
We have had a winter. We have had a winter. There is no doubt about that. All right, guys. Well, welcome back to the Bow Trader Podcast. So you got John here, and we got Brandon with us again this morning. And Brandon, say good morning to everybody.
Good morning.
See
it's
there?
Good to be here, man.
Right on cue. Right on cue again. I love it. I love it. All right, guys. So we're gonna talk about lessons from the season. You know, we talked a little bit about our season last time, and we want to go into some lessons that we learned from the season this year, and you know, kind of what it looks like to make changes when you realize that you need to make changes with what you're doing. Brandon and I talked a little bit about this, kind of leading up to our conversation, just kind of chatting this morning, and how hard-headed we can be about making changes sometimes, and how that shows up in all areas of life. But we're gonna talk about, we're gonna kind of start out talking about what that looks like from a hunting perspective. So Brandon, you had some stories about that. I wanted you to share that this morning.
Oh yeah. Well, it just shows my stubbornness, and I'm sure some of our stubbornness. Other people, I know men aren't typically stubborn, but,
Right? Yeah. Not men.
and we would never be creatures of habit, right? But one of the things that hit me and hit me too late this year was that when things were not going great with the season, and the deer were not doing the typical things that they have done in the past. His historical patterns weren't the same because of trees that are down from hurricanes, and we talked about some of the weather events last time.
Mm-hmm.
But it obviously changed patterns, changed things they were doing, and what I realized and what I learned this year is the importance of adjustability. Like being able to make adjustments quickly to what the deer are doing or aren't doing. But what I found was I just kind of kept doing the same thing I've always done. I kept, trying to hunt the same way I'd always hunted. Even though it wasn't working, I just kept trying. I kept thinking, well, eventually it'll work. And, pretty soon you're 3/4 of the way through the season and you go, you know what, this isn't working. And I think that that's something that I learned that was a really good lesson is when you realize that it's not working, try something else.
Yeah.
You may not know exactly what to do, but what you're doing is not working. I think, we've all heard this. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And I think my hunting this year could have been described as insanity. It literally almost drove me insane.
Yeah.
But being able to make that adjustment, and I know I told you the analogy of baseball and the higher level I went in baseball. I didn't make it past college. Wasn't very good once I got to college at that level. But it became more and more important to make adjustments quickly in hitting. You went from being able to have the time to make adjustments, maybe from week to week even, to I need to make these adjustments in the at-bat. I need to realize what this pitcher's doing now. And so for me, one of the things I learned was be flexible, be adjustable. Don't just stick to what you've always done. Don't just think that somehow the deer are going to do what you want them to do or what they've always done, but be able to go figure out what they're doing. Something that I think I got caught up into is once the season came in, I'd done some scouting, I'd made some plans, I'd had some strategy, and once the season came in, I wanted to hunt. And sometimes I think it's so much better to take time again to reevaluate, to go back, scout more, take some time, even though like you want to be in a tree, but figure out what the deer are doing, because I think we feel like we have ideas, and it works to some degree, of how to manipulate their behavior, when really, if we're going to be successful, what I learned this year is we're going to have to figure out their behavior and realign ourselves to that versus thinking that we're going to somehow, with a corn pile, make them do what we want them to do, especially a mature buck. And in a year like this year, where there was plenty of food without having to come to a corn pile.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, man. There was a we were gonna have a good acorn crop this year, regardless.
Yeah.
And then because of those storms,
Yeah.
it all hit the ground at
the
once.
Same time. Yes.
And we had that happen a couple, maybe 3 years ago. We had we had some pretty rough drought conditions.
Yeah.
And then we got some rain, like the second week of the season.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, everything dropped.
Yeah.
And I remember calling some forestry friends of mine. I was like, man, what's going on?
Yeah.
And they said, just the trees going through this stress
Right.
of the season. It's normal to see something like this. Nothing's
Yeah.
going wrong. All your trees are not about to die or
Yeah.
anything. Because
That's
I mean,
right.
I was freaked out by it.
Yeah.
We had just these crazy. We had red oaks and white oaks dropping at the same time, and we still
Wow.
had persimmons hanging on the tree, and
Wow.
that is not normal.
Yeah. That's great.
That's what alarmed me one day. Was I was out hunting in it, and I saw that, and I was like, wait. It's
Yeah.
September. What's going on?
Yeah. Why are the acorns already
and then
over there?
and then it was like, and then we did have a later white oak drop, which was normal. It's normal for us to see that, like in October time frame, where those really big white oaks will start dropping. And but yeah, that was interesting. But I can't tell you how many folks we've had coming in the shop this year, just talking about, man, I'm not getting pictures anymore.
It happened with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was, I think a big part of that was the deer's habitat changed. We had those cameras where we normally have those cameras, because we run cameras all the time.
That's
My
right.
son is like, he loves it. He loves getting pictures all the time.
Yeah.
And so we've got him out there year round, and it's rare that we go and move a camera. And we learned this year that, hey, we got to move some stuff, because we know the deer are here.
That's right.
But where in the world had they gone? And last weekend, I had a guy come in, and he just said he blamed it on baiting. And, I think that there is some validity to that. Obviously, I don't know where he hunts. I don't, we get to talk with people about all kinds of stuff, but we don't really get into real good details about, it's not like they're dropping us a pin and saying, hey, look at this with me or anything like that. I do get the opportunity to do that sometimes, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit. But I think this year we almost needed to look at all of our hunting properties as though it was brand new property that we'd never hunted before.
Absolutely.
Because in so many ways it was. I've got Ethan, college guy that works for us. He harvested his target buck Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And I didn't talk to him about that. He was supposed to be at church, but
he went to the 11.
Yeah, right. Anyway, so he went Sunday morning, and he got this buck that he's been watching since it was in velvet. Like he thought he was going to have an opportunity at this buck, full velvet, back in September.
Yeah.
And like 2 or 3 days before the season, he showed up on camera, and he was hard horn. I mean, and it happened like it happened in like a 4-day period or something. It was pretty wild.
Yeah.
I mean, we were watching him. We were, he was showing me pictures every day back in late August and early September. And then I think our season opened on the 14th of September this year. So even like on the 10th of September, we saw pictures of him where he was still soft-horn, and man, he was so excited. And then that deer disappeared.
Yeah.
He was just gone. He hunted him a couple times early season and then just couldn't figure out where he was at. That storm came through. They lost like 70% of their trees on their farm. I mean, it's pretty rough where his place is at. And so finally the deer start showing back up. Because all right, so the deer early season, it's kind of a food thing.
That's right.
They're loading up on food, getting whatever they can, because they know what's coming. Bucks are doing it because they're, as that transition from soft horn to hard horn happens, what's happening there is this massive testosterone dump, and that's what causes that velvet to come off. Mm-hmm. Well, you can look at it as like a 16-year-old kid, right? That 12-year-old kid, he eats a lot, but nothing compared to when he's 16 or 17 or 18 years old. Man, they'll eat you out of house and home at that point. I am living that right now, okay? And so that's kind of that transition period they're going through. So they're loading up on food, and you can get them pretty consistent at that point because they're going to food sources. And then you have this big period during the season where it's not like they're not eating anymore, but their mind is not on food anymore. It's on other things that go along with their year. Yeah. And then later in the year, it moves back to food, and there's less food available. So it becomes, if you can figure out where that food is, you can find the deer. Yeah. But we still have to remember, most animals are primarily nocturnal. Yes. Right? Yeah. So it is just a battle. It's just a battle.
It is. And especially, it was a grind. I will say I hunted till the last, minute of daylight this season. But, it gets to the point where sometimes you're like climbing the tree going, I know I'm not going to see anything. Yeah. Or I know the chances of me seeing a really good buck are very slim. But again, that's when I just have to change my focus to, I'm going to enjoy being out here. If I kill a deer, it's a bonus. And but still trying to learn things. But I know for me, I made adjustments too late. My son, especially my oldest son, and I, Dake and I, we talked about where are the deer. Finally, I'm like, look, man, we got to do something different. And I think he kind of was just like, heck with this, I'll just, do something else. And I kept trying and just hunting different places. And I honestly don't feel like I ever really pinpointed exactly what they were doing, but which by the time I started trying, it was later in the season, and so a lot of the I guess better hunting opportunities were behind. But I did learn that this year of just being able to be adjustable and making quick adjustments when you realize, okay, this is not a typical season, because it's going to happen again. And I don't know that this year is not even more important than most years to be in the woods, maybe even now, trying to figure out what were the deer doing. Mm-hmm. Because we talked about this last week, the down trees and all of that, they're not going to be gone next year. Yeah. It's going to be the same. So, scouting, figuring out, like, where were they? What were they doing? What were their patterns really like? I think is probably going to be more important this year than probably any other year. So
I think what's going to be a challenge for the 2025 season is figuring out where deer are bedding now.
Yes.
Because, we have a lot of pine trees in Georgia. It's a big part of our economy is growing pine trees. So because of that, pine plantations are usually clean.
Right.
Right. It's land that you burn on a regular basis and keep it clean so those trees are able to grow. Right. So in those areas where it's clean, that's not a bedding area.
Right.
A deer's not just going to go out there and lay down because the pine straw is comfortable.
Right. Yeah.
Even though it may be,
they
can't. They don't have any cover, so they're not doing that.
Right.
So we've known, okay, that this isn't a bedding area. This is, they're going to travel through here, whatever. And from a bow hunting standpoint, that's extremely hard to hunt an area like that.
Right.
Because when you have an area that's clean like that, deer in the southeast, at least in Georgia where we hunt, they are no respecter of trails.
Right.
They will walk wherever they feel like walking. I've hunted in Illinois, and buddy, let me tell you something. If you find a trail, they're going to be on that trail.
Yeah.
They are at some point going to come through that trail.
Right.
It's just different.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I'll say about hunting up north, up in Illinois, is that, man, a deer will walk straight across the field.
Yeah.
You will never see a deer walking across a field down here. Yeah, it's rare if you do.
That's right.
I'm talking about in the middle of the day. They'll just walk across the field,
Yeah.
And I was shocked to see some of that stuff.
Yeah.
There was a cornfield that I was hunting on up in Illinois this season that they had just cut the corn on that field, and I was hunting in the back corner, and the combine was still sitting up in the front corner. I ranged that combine, and it was like 1,800 and something yards.
Oh, wow.
This huge, hundreds of acres.
Yeah.
In this, that field was probably, it was a little over 100 acres, I think, in that field itself. Now, we did go to another field when we were doing some scouting, and that was the biggest field I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
It was just, there is not a field anywhere in the state of Georgia that field was like as big as Bullitt County.
Yeah.
It was just huge, man. And but anyway, to see the deer just walk across the middle of the field, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is going on?
Right.
But yeah, so looking at, I think you're right. I think right now, there's two things that need to happen if you're a bow hunter. Number one, don't just put your bow up.
Right.
You know what was going on with your bow. You've been shooting it. You've been dragging it through the woods for the past 2.5, 3 months.
Man.
And okay, this wasn't working quite right. It was good enough to get through the season. I didn't want to make a change, but I know I need to take care of this. This rest isn't working right, or this string is looking rough right here. Whatever the case may be, take the time right now. If we're your bow shop, come see us right now.
Yeah.
If you don't live here and, you're going to be going to another bow shop, I promise you they will thank you for coming in January to get your bow worked on, because there's just not that pressure of, the vast majority of people will pull their bow out a month before the season.
Yeah, they're going to come in September 1st and want you to fix it, right?
Yeah, and
along
it just
with everybody else,
and along with everybody else, and that's fine. We know that's going to happen, but it creates a lot of stress for us, to try to handle the workload, because in addition to working on bows and getting stuff ready, we're also selling a lot of new equipment during that time.
Yeah,
so it becomes a leading up to the season, it becomes, getting here at 6 or 7 a.m. every morning and leaving, when we finally get that work done for the day, which who knows what time that is. And that's fine. We understand the seasonality of our business, just like a peanut farmer can't, I'm sure they would love to be able to go pick their peanuts in July, because they got nothing going on.
That's right.
They're done planting. They're just kind of maintaining their crop, making sure everything is sprayed when it needs to be sprayed with the fungicide and stuff like that. But the reality is they can't do it until they're ready.
That's right.
So the reality for me is I can't do the work until somebody comes in with it.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So that's what I would encourage everybody to do is instead of just putting your bow away, take it out, look at it. If you're not comfortable with doing that, bring it in, let us go through it, take it to your local bow shop, let them go through it. And, make sure your equipment is where it needs to be. And then the next thing I would say is still get out in the woods. It's still early yet to be, finding sheds. You may find some. We did have one or two bucks that we were seeing on camera that had already dropped something. Like even 2 weeks ago. So that was probably injury related.
Yeah.
That caused him to drop that. But it's probably early for you to see that, but it's not too early for you to get out and figure out, okay, where are these deer moving? What's going on with them?
Yeah.
To have a better idea of what you're going to be doing going into the 2025 season. And if you run trail cameras, man, and you get out and you find something, move that trail camera.
Absolutely.
Get it over there on that trail that you found. And because there's not going to be any pressure, people aren't going in the woods and hunting. Your neighbor's not going in the woods and hunting anymore. Your neighbor's probably not running their feeders anymore or anything like that. We've got a neighboring property, and in fact, one time when I was hunting this year, their feeder went off, and I didn't know they had a feeder.
Yeah,
and I just about came out of the tree, and it was, over 100 yards from me.
Right.
But when it's probably 200 yards from me, but when you're deep in the woods and there's no sounds besides, the mosquitoes buzzing in your ear every now and then, and, the crazy woodpecker that tries to take your eye out or something like that.
You're willing to waste an arrow on.
Right. Yeah. So in other words, it's pretty quiet. And then all of a sudden you hear this metal sound of corn hitting this feeder. I was like, what is going on?
What's happening? Yeah.
And, so we learned that every day at 1648 or 448, that feeder was going to go off. And, we never saw a deer going towards that feeder until dark.
Yeah.
Yep. And and listen, I'm not here to tell you don't use feeders. Listen, if you want to use feeders, use them. If you want to use corn piles, use them. It's legal here. Use them if you want to. We can get into all kind of rabbit holes on that, but if you want to do that, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But just use it the right way. We'll use corn on our place, but I will never hunt over corn.
Right.
Well, I'll rarely hunt over corn. There have been times, where I've taken a kid to go hunting and we'll just sit on a corn pile in a ground blind. We're just like 30 yards from the corn pile.
Right.
And I know that deer are eventually going to show up to it, just depending on what time of year it is. And I want them to get an opportunity. So here we go. Right. But typically if I have a feed source, I'm going to be hunting close to it.
Yeah.
But I want to be in between where the deer is and where that food is.
That's right.
Like if I had a choice, of knowing one thing from a whitetail hunting standpoint, I want to know where that deer's bedding.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is if I could only know one thing.
Right.
That's the thing I want to know.
Yeah. For sure. And I know a couple of years ago, man, I had this place I was hunting and still had it this year to hunt, but it just wasn't the deer just weren't there. That it's kind of it's in the city limits, and so there's so much development going on here that a lot of that terrain changed around the area, and I think it affected the deer. But man, we had some really nice bucks. This kind of felt like a seek one kind of thing where, when I would climb a tree, I'm looking over in somebody's backyard. I'm watching their dog run around the backyard kind of thing. But really nice bucks. And so we had a camera with some corn right on the edge of a field. And so as you walked in, on my left, there were houses. On my right was just this really nasty pond. So there was probably about 75 to 100 yard strip of woods, and I noticed like this really nice buck is showing up every single day, but it's like 6:30. So he's like 30, 45 minutes after dark just about every single day. And so I waited and waited, and I needed a west wind that would be blowing out over that pond, because I knew then like he's not gonna pick me up. I can get positioned right. And finally that day comes. It's like perfect. It's a cool day, west wind. It's one of the few times that I can say I planned it and it worked out exactly like I planned, you know. And so I go probably about 100 yards or maybe a little more into the woods, down this little strip of woods, climb the tree. Um, you know, probably 30 minutes before dark, about 15 does just blowing by me, headed to the corn pile. Well, I look up and I see one little doe. This is later in the season. One little doe, and I think it was probably a young doe that came in or late, and I look behind her, and here he comes. Well, I'd already killed 3 deer that year with my bow. You know, they were all 22 to 23 yards. Well, I range him, and he's going to be at like 22 steps, right? 22 yards. Well, the only thing I had then was the issue of drawing without the doe.
Would 15 does,
Yeah, well,
or
they're
they had
gone.
already gone through.
They're
Yeah.
gone. But without this doe seeing me, or without him seeing me. And so it worked out perfect, man. This doe walks behind this green bush as his head goes behind a big pine tree. And I mean, I couldn't have drawn it up any better.
Yeah.
And so I draw back, and I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, this is game over.
Mm-hmm.
This is done. Like, man, it's worked perfectly. I I shoot. Somehow I made a bad shot. I don't know what happened. Like, that distance all season long had been just money, right?
Mhm.
It should be. And I hit him low, just kind of grazed the belly, and he took off. We never found him. Found some blood and stuff, but I think he probably lived. And but it was set up perfect. But I would have never killed that deer over the corn. I had to get 100, 150 yards away from that corn. I knew where they were bedding. It was a much more simple situation than being in a huge block of woods trying to figure it out, because it was just an easy funnel.
Yeah.
But I never would have been able to have a shot at that deer hunting the corn, like you were saying, getting away from the corn, figuring out their travel ways, those kind of things is a lot more effective than what we do. And not to ruffle feathers, but I feel like as hunters, it's easy for us to get lazy. Where honestly, it's just easy to go. I mean, it's kind of nice just to go climb up in a stand, with a corn pile, and you don't have to walk, 400 or 500 yards or
Yeah.
whatever. And, but I think success, to have consistent success and consistency and seeing better deer, it takes that effort. And so at least that's what I've seen over the last several years.
Yeah, and that's just private land hunting.
Yeah, that's not even counting public. I actually hunted public for the first time in my life this year. We were up at Lake Oconee right after Christmas with my wife and her family. Love my family dearly, but I can only sit in a house for so long. And so finally I got a pass to go, and so I went to the Oconee WMA.
Okay.
First time I've ever done that. And so that was really cool. I walked in, and it was different, though, because I walk in and I'm finding this spot. I'm actually finding some really fresh scrapes, and it was archery only and had been for a couple of weeks. And so I'm looking, and I find some scrapes. There's some fresh rubs. There's a lot of sign, a lot more sign than I expected to see. And I'm like, I think this is the place. There was a little creek that ran through there, nice little draw where the deer were walking. I was like, man, I'm gonna hunt here. And I look over and there's a climber. And so I'm like, all right, I'll keep moving. So I go on a little bit further, and I found this place where like 3 creeks ran together, and there was a pine thicket on one side. There was a trail just worn out down the edge of that pine thicket. And I'm like, well, I'll give this a try. Well, I climb the tree. As I get about 3/4 up to where I want to be, the elevation I want to sit at, I turn around and look over my left shoulder. There's a hang on up the ridge.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so I'm like, at this point, I'm like, well, maybe they won't show up. You know,
Yeah.
this archery, this probably, I don't know, it was at least 100 yards. I'm like, well, we'll just, if I see one, I'll point it out to them, but I ended up seeing a couple of does, so that was really cool. But it's like you said, we're talking like having to work to get to a place to hunt on private land, public even more so.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized how out of shape I was, especially going back. Most of the walk in was downhill. Most of the walk out was uphill.
It's funny how that works.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, can it be downhill both ways? And
No. It could only be uphill both ways when you were walking to school as a kid.
in the snow.
In the snow, barefoot. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we've all heard that story or some rendition of it, right?
That's right. And so, but yeah, so that was interesting, and I think that just being willing to do that extra, and try to make the most of it. That's one thing I hate, man. I hate when I leave a hunt feeling like I wasted it.
Mm-hmm.
You get that opportunity to go, and either you just didn't go to the right spot and you know it, or I don't know if you've ever done this, but I get to the place that I really want to hunt, and I think I've got the right tree, and I climb the tree, and I'm like, I can't see anything.
Yeah.
And, being able to even just pick out the right tree. I mean, but I hate leaving a hunt feeling like I just wasted that opportunity, And so, and I think a lot of times when we're just hunting a food plot, or we're just hunting a corn pile, I think it's kind of a wasted opportunity. It's not giving us the best opportunity. We're not maximizing our chances to see a good deer.
Yeah, one of my things is I hate wasting time.
Yes.
Like it bothers me more than it should.
Right.
And it keeps me from going hunting sometimes.
Yeah.
Because I'll get home from work on a Saturday. We close the shop at 2:00 on Saturdays, and I'll get home and it's like, all right, this is perfect. We got time to get in the woods. We can go, especially early season. Man, you got plenty of time. And I'll get home and I'll see something that needs to be done, and I'll just like, nah, I'm gonna stay. I'm not going hunting today. I'm gonna stay here and I'm gonna work on this. And that's why when you look at that board over there, Wes has got 5 checks and I got 0. It's not because I didn't have the opportunity to go hunting. It's because I saw something that I wanted to do. I wanted to clean this up at the barn, or I wanted to work on this side-by-side that's got bad gas in it, or whatever, And I'm just because I'll feel like, I'll get out there to go hunting, and
it's just running through your mind.
I just can't stop thinking about it. It's like, man, it's that old commercial that was like it was like some kind of stain treatment commercial or something. And this guy goes in for an interview and he's got this stain on his shirt, and the stain is supposedly talking to the other guy. Right. He can't think about anything except that stain on the guy's shirt, and I can't get it out of my mind that there's something that I need to be doing. And I don't.
Well, see, you and I, then we need to somehow merge and meet in the middle, because when deer season comes in, man, like the house, it just falls apart.
Well, so what you're saying is you are a pro at ignoring everything
I can overlook
that's going
it,
on.
man. I'm like, Yeah, that can wait.
Yeah.
I can get to that later.
Yeah.
And so, but I should probably be more the other way. But if there's an opportunity, man, I can. There's not many things I can just completely block out of my mind. But during deer season, I think I have this spiritual gift of not noticing or just not wanting to notice things that I probably should be working on.
The spiritual gift of selective discernment,
Yeah,
or of completely ignoring
Right.
that the house is on fire.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
Oh my goodness! Well, we'll come up with some good spiritual gifts, won't we?
That's right.
Man,
Yeah.
I have to get my Bible here. I don't know if that one's in there.
Yeah,
or
I don't
not,
think
but
it is.
It might be.
but
It
I
might
mean,
be.
I don't think those lists are exhaustive, though.
Okay,
I think
okay.
there's just a few that
Okay.
were referenced. I'm sure this is one of them.
Yeah, that's been my challenge for this year at least, because every time when I'd come home in the afternoons, back to that idea of actually setting aside that time to go and hunt. I'd come home in the afternoons and I'd see, man, I still got that pile of trees that I hadn't done something with.
Yeah.
And my tractor has been down for months.
Wow.
And I've got a guy that's working on it, and man, he's had to tear this thing apart to try to figure out what's going on with it, and he still hasn't gotten to the bottom of it. And his schedule's been crazy because of everything going on around here from a construction standpoint and everything. So he works a full-time job and then also works on equipment on the side, and his job has been running him ragged.
Yeah.
So it's like he's had our tractor for a while, and I know he's going to get to it. I know he is, but it's like I haven't been able to do stuff because with a tractor, with a front end loader, moving some trees is like 30 minutes.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's the best thing ever.
With a fat guy and a chainsaw, it is not 30 minutes. So talking about realizing how out of shape you are, man. A chainsaw will teach you that pretty quick.
Yeah. I'll tell you the other thing that'll teach you how out of shape you are is dragging a deer.
Oh my gosh. Man. So that deer that buck that Wes killed this year, he was way back on the creek.
Yeah.
Okay. And the barrier from kind of where our pine plantation is to the creek usually runs about 100 or 150 yards. Okay.
Yeah.
He shot that deer like right on the creek, which is the property line, which is, normal here. Creeks are property lines a lot of times.
That's right.
And so he shot that deer, and it ran the exact opposite direction.
They don't run to the truck.
Now, there has been a couple times where that's happened. Like I've got a friend that went out mule deer hunting, and he killed his first mule deer with his bow. Made like a 48-yard shot or something. I mean, he just pinwheeled this deer.
Yeah.
And he took off running and ran and died in the trail.
Wow.
And it was one of those, it was one of those properties where it was public land, but you were able to drive side by sides and stuff like that on it. So they were able to pull right up to him and load him in the back of the side by side and head out. And he's like, man, I'm never going to have another hunt like this. It wasn't like it was this crazy, insane trophy or something, but to him, it's a trophy.
Absolutely.
It's his first mule deer, and he fell in love with it.
Cool.
Every year he's trying to figure out, all right, where am I going to get to go? I want to go chase mule deer again.
Yeah.
And he just told me, he said, John, it's a completely different game.
Yeah.
But anyway, this deer ran the exact opposite direction that we would have wanted him to go. And we got all these limbs and trees down in the creek.
It's tough.
Dragging through a creek already is not fun because you've got all these roots and everything.
Yeah.
If you have an area that's wet and you've got hardwoods, you've always got these roots coming up trying to get air.
Yep.
Right? And so you've got all these roots on top that you're dragging over. And then in addition to that, we've got trees that we got to get over.
Yeah.
And, it's in the middle of the night and we're dragging. And the worst part of this was nothing looks the same at night to start
Yeah.
with.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, add to that, this is land we've been hunting for a decade.
Yeah.
So I really know where I'm at.
Right.
I've never gotten lost out there. I mean, it's not that big of a piece of property, but I've never gotten lost or anything. But here's what happened this year. So you're dragging this deer, and it's like you got to go over this tree. So you turn around, and you're facing the deer, and you're pulling backwards.
Yeah.
And you finally get over this tree, and then you turn around, and it's like, man, where am I at?
Well, and everything looks different.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I turned around, and I'm like, okay, well, we're only, we got 200 yards to go with this deer to where we can get out, and we can probably get to him with the truck. And I turn around, and I'm like, I said, Wes,
Which way do we go?
where are we at right now? I said, turn your headlamp off so we can see if we can see some lights. I mean, that's how bad it was.
Yeah.
I got so disoriented
Yeah.
pulling that thing.
Yeah.
And the deer weighed like 220 pounds or so, which is huge for a Georgia
For here,
deer.
Yeah.
And it was a deer we had never gotten on camera.
Yeah.
Well, not this season. We figured out that we had gotten him on camera a couple of years ago.
Okay.
But we had not gotten him on camera this year. And anyway, man, it was hands down the worst drag we have ever had.
Well, one of the things that's kind of funny is tracking deer. So I'll go track deer for people, and we find the deer, and I don't just leave them with it, but they'll start to drag it. And this does not apply to anyone listening to this podcast. You would never do this. But we get going, and it's so slow, and they're dragging it, and I'm like, my gosh, it's 9 o'clock. I still got an hour 15-minute drive home. I gotta, and so finally I'm like, hey, why don't you let me give you a hand with that? 'Cause
Yeah.
I'm like, we gotta get this thing out of the woods, man.
Yeah.
And so I'll end up dragging that deer, but man, it is exhausting.
Yeah.
And but I'm like, I can't be here all night. We can't go 5 yards and stop. We
yeah.
gotta get this thing.
No,
out
that
of
ain't
here.
gonna work.
And so, but yeah, sometimes when you do that, you're dragging. I mean, it can be a 400 or 500 yard drag
Mm-hmm.
because you're tracking it. You're not tracking it because it died 100 yards away, and so that can be the unfun part.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had somebody tell me one time the best way to ruin a hunt is to take a shot. I'm like, what?
The best part though is when we load it in the truck, I get to go home.
There you go.
I don't
Yep.
have to go clean the deer
Yep.
or whatever.
Yep.
So, but anyway, yeah. So it definitely tells on you when you're dragging one out, and but the good side is at least you did kill one.
Yeah.
So,
Which is the point.
yes,
You know,
absolutely.
That is the point of going out there. But, going out and getting the opportunity to be out in creation and just being unplugged for a little while.
Yeah.
Like I'll get on the guys all the time. I say get on to them. I'll just be like, guys, why are you sitting there on your phone?
Yeah.
Put
Yeah,
that thing away.
absolutely.
Completely unplug for a little while.
Yeah.
Watch what's going on around you. Just, I think there are a lot of deer alive right now because somebody was sitting there on TikTok
Absolutely.
and didn't even know they walked by.
Absolutely.
Because I mean, it's like I'll laugh at myself sometimes when I'm hunting because you expect, you're sitting there looking and kind of watching around and making sure you're not moving too much and turning your head real slow and stuff. And it's like, man, these deer are not walking through the woods like some kind of ninja, looking everywhere. Now a doe might be,
doe, for
we
sure.
talked a little bit about the difference between a buck and a doe, just like we're hard headed and we get into our habits. Like I bet the majority of the guys listening right now, I bet you put the same shoe on first every morning.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how much of a creature of habit we are.
Yeah, we probably wash the same body part first every time, like left arm every time in the shower. I mean, it's just what I do. And if I don't wash my hair first, then I feel
You
like
forget to wash your hair.
the whole day is ruined. You know.
Why are we such creatures of habit, man? I mean,
Yeah.
it's comical to me, and I'll be sitting there when I'm hunting and I'm thinking about, and I think the reason I do this, the reason I'm like looking everywhere, is because a deer will just show up.
Oh yeah.
It's
just
like,
out of
man,
nowhere.
I was just looking right there
Yeah.
2 seconds ago,
Yeah.
and then I turn and I look back, and I hadn't heard a thing,
Yeah.
and there's just this doe standing
Yeah.
there. And I don't know what it is about does, but they will pick you off.
So easy.
I mean, it's like you can kill a buck if you can
Yeah.
just get to where the buck's at. You can kill him,
Yeah.
or you can have your opportunity.
Right.
I mean, we talked about last time that I had an opportunity to kill what was my target buck this year, which for most people would not be considered a trophy, but for me it was, just because
Yeah.
of what he is. And man, he took up way too much brain space.
Yeah.
I don't have extra space. Okay.
I understand.
I
that
don't have
completely.
extra space for something to just come in and start taking it up. And he was taking up more room than he should have.
Yeah.
And he gave me my opportunity, and I blew it.
Yeah.
I finally got drawn, but
Yeah.
it was meant to be this year that I was just going to draw my bow on deer, and that was it.
practice
Apparently,
drawing.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, dude, I got really good at holding my bow at full draw.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but you talking about does and how, they're just so jumpy, they're so alert, but if there's a place that I hunt consistently, I've had does that will walk out and look at that tree.
Oh yeah.
Like they'll look and see if you're there, and it's like, it's such a difference. Most of the bucks, they're kind of cruising through. They got their mind probably on one thing, and they're just like us, just kind of like doody doody doo.
I've had a buck look straight up at me and sit there and look and kind of turn his head and then be like, whatever.
Yeah,
just go
exactly.
walking off.
Yeah.
Whereas you have a doe do that. If they ever look up at you,
Yeah,
I mean, move, don't move, whatever you want to do,
Yeah.
it's probably over.
yeah, and this is probably not a good practice, but I kind of have a rule that if a doe blows, it's got to go. And so like as soon as the foot stomps, the
Yeah.
arrows fly.
Oh
right?
yeah, no, I know. So Sunday was closing day. That was the last day of the season, and I hunted Sunday until the last second of shooting light, and again, I didn't get drawn. I tried to, and I got busted, and it was a doe. I mean, it was an old doe, big old long nose, and I was like, man, I this is it. I gotta go. And she was probably pregnant. She looked pretty big, and it didn't happen. And this little 4-point came walking through. He had no care in the world.
Yeah.
But that doe, I mean, she was 40 yards from me.
Yeah.
And I'm behind the tree because I saddle hunt, so I'm able to use the tree to really, hide a lot of what I'm doing.
Absolutely.
And from behind the tree,
Yeah.
she saw my hand going and grabbing my bow. How in the world?
Yeah.
How,
That's crazy.
and I know what it was she saw the movement, and trees don't have arms, so she's like,
right.
nope, something's wrong.
Something's
so
up.
here she goes blowing and
Yeah.
raising Cain and getting out of there. But that buck came walking through at he wasn't that close to me, but he wasn't even looking.
Yeah.
He was just, he just walking through,
Yeah.
going,
But you'll have
doing
them
his
come
thing.
in and they'll smell the tree you climbed.
Something I've noticed over the past couple years, talking about deer smelling trees, is them eating the moss off the tree.
Huh.
I watched it again Sunday.
Yeah.
A young deer sitting there eating it. And 4 years ago, I actually recorded that deer that's hanging on the wall up there.
Right.
I recorded him for like 30 minutes
Really?
eating. I'll show you that video. In fact,
Yeah.
I'll post that video. But it was crazy. He was just sitting there eating it.
How about
And
that?
we pulled that video up like a month ago, and we were looking at it, and I was like, man, this deer looks familiar. And one of the guys was like, John, that's that deer right there.
That's wild.
And we started looking at it, and sure enough,
Yeah.
I killed him. I killed him either the next year or 2 years later. and the mass that he picked up in that time was unreal.
That's right. Yeah.
But that's what he was doing. You know how the trees, especially in a creek bottom, they'll get that green,
That's right.
whatever growing on the bottom of it. That's what he was sitting there eating. I mean, and sat there and ate it for 30 minutes. Just crazy.
Yeah.
I'd never seen a deer do that before. And then I saw him again really close to the same spot that I watched that deer do it a few years ago. I watched it again on Sunday, this young deer coming out, and that's what he was eating, or he or she, whatever it was eating, was that moss, that stuff growing on the bottom of the tree.
So there's another lesson. Don't hunt corn, hunt moss.
I mean, hunt something, you know. I mean, listen, you ain't going to kill them from your living room. I can promise you that. Or sitting there, you know, like I was this year, running a chainsaw.
Absolutely.
You're not going to get that done. But, yeah, there's definitely a difference between bucks and does and what it looks like to get them and everything. So, yeah, it's always a challenge, and it's always so much fun to me to be out there just to have the opportunity to learn something new.
Yes.
Like I don't want to, you know, be pious or something and be like, oh, I've learned something new every time I go.
Yeah.
Because, you know, sometimes you're just out there and you're just like, you know, you didn't see something new.
Right.
But then sometimes you see something that's like,
I've never seen
that is crazy.
Yeah.
You know, I had no idea that would happen. I had no idea a doe would grunt, you know.
Yeah.
It's like, what? You know, and so that's really cool to get to see that. And to see how deer respond to just all kinds of different things. You know, I mean, when God created that animal, he gave them some really cool stuff to keep them alive. And seeing how they use that is really cool. So I just think it's so much fun to be able to get out and do that.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about being in the woods is you never know what you're going to see. You know, you never know. You never know when that really great opportunity to get a nice deer is going to happen. But you also never know when you're going to see something you've never seen before, experience something you've never seen, and you know, that's part of the excitement. It's kind of like fishing in the ocean. You kind of don't ever know what you're going to catch, you know, and it's always something new, and it's the same with the woods. And just like for me, you know, hunting that public land for the first time, it was just a cool experience, you know, just something different. And yeah, it's always fun just to be able to get out, you know, and be in the woods.
Yeah.
So for me, a lot of sermon prep happens in a tree.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I get it, man. I keep like a little small leather journal.
Yeah.
In my pack, and even Sunday when I was hunting, I pulled it out. Was it Sunday? Yeah, it was Sunday, and I'm sitting there making notes about stuff because I taught Sunday morning, and I did not get through everything.
Right.
You know, so there's going to be a to be continued
There
that's
you
coming
go.
up this Sunday,
Yeah.
right? And it was because we were talking about spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
And you can't get through that in 30 minutes.
No.
You can't get through that in 3 months, I
Right,
think.
right,
you know,
right,
but you try to do things succinctly, and you know, it's in a small group, it's in a Sunday school type setting, and you know, it's just we leave room for people to ask questions, for us to have discussion and stuff like that. It's not like it's a lecture environment.
Right.
And so a lot of questions came up on Sunday, and I'm sitting there making notes about them, you know, because one of the things that I like to do, and I want to be better about this, but when a question comes up that we really need to spend time on, I want to make sure we go back to that.
Yes.
You know, and because number one, I want people to realize, hey, I want you to ask questions.
Right.
And if you don't address questions, then people won't ask them.
Why ask it?
You know, what's the point of doing that, right? So there was one in particular, and I actually reached out to this lady this week, and I said, hey, thank you so much for asking the question you did. I guarantee you there's other people thinking about that.
Sure.
And apologize that I wasn't able to, give
Yeah.
it the attention that it needed to be given, because it was
Right.
a pretty deep question.
Yeah.
The question was, why does God allow Satan to do what he does?
Right.
That is not a quick 30-second blurb.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I told her, I said, listen, we're gonna continue in the, kind of in the study that we're in, but when we get done with this, that's first on the list that we're gonna go
You can't
into.
say he just does.
I mean, you can't. I mean, who are we to question God,
Yeah.
right? Who are we to question God?
Joe
But-
tried that, right? Like we talked
I
about
mean,
last
yeah,
week.
he did, and it's like, well, and he's not the only example,
Yeah, that's right.
that we get to see in Scripture where somebody was questioning God and, not exactly following through
Yeah.
like he said to, and you got somebody that took a staff and hit a rock, and well, how'd that work out for
Yeah,
him, right?
right,
You know,
right.
so I mean, yeah, we get to look at things like that, and the goal from the word go is we don't want to be smarter about Scripture. I don't want to be where I could say, well, I've got all of Scripture memorized and I'm holier than you.
Oh,
Okay,
gosh.
whatever.
Yeah.
That's great. Fantastic. But I do want to be able to say that I've helped somebody better understand God's character,
Yeah.
because if I can better understand God's character, I can be closer to him.
Exactly.
And then I have a better understanding of why I want to behave in a certain way. Not because I have the fear of, man, God's going to send me to hell if I
Right.
don't do this.
Right.
That legalistic attitude.
Right.
But because, man, look at what he's done for me.
Absolutely.
Look at what he's done for me.
Yeah.
And I want to do things that's going to cause people to want to know him.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say want to know him the way I know him, because I don't fully know
Sure.
God. I mean,
Sure.
how could I fully know him?
Right.
I know him a lot better than I did a year ago.
Yes.
I know him
And that's the
way,
goal.
yeah,
That's what I mean.
absolutely. I know him way better than I did a decade ago.
Sure.
I know him way, way, way better than I did 20 years ago.
Sure.
But there's never that, that phrase arrived.
No.
Where did that even come from? We need to look that up, and we need to go find that guy and like slap him one time.
Absolutely.
Whoever came up with that idea of arrived.
Yeah.
So if any of you listening don't feel like you've arrived, well, welcome to the club.
Yeah. I always tell people, look, God has you in a process. It's not a project, right? He's
it's not something that you're just going to complete.
that
one
you're
day.
going to be finished. You're
Yeah.
not going to get to this place in this life and go, okay, I'm done. And the other thing I encourage people with is just enjoy the journey. Like, enjoy the relationship, enjoy the fellowship, and know that, like, he's going to work out of you what he's put in you. And just walk with him, And Jesus made it pretty clear that if you abide in him, then you'll produce much fruit.
Yeah.
And he makes it really simple. We complicate it. And
We're good at that, right?
well,
At complicating things.
women are. Guys would never do that. Right?
Okay, all right. Brandon is the one that said that. Just for the record here,
No, I'm
as he
saying-
said that, his chair dropped like 7 inches. He just hit some turbulence
I
over
got
here.
struck by lightning. But no, I say that sarcastically because we are so good, guys especially at overcomplicating the obvious. And the gospel's so simple, right? Believe and walk with the Lord, and he does the rest. He does for us what we can't do for ourselves. And man, we complicate that. And a lot of it's because of what we've seen. If you grew up in church, you probably heard a lot more about what not to do than what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you heard some of the do's, it was still probably a lot of do's and don'ts, and a lot less about knowing God. God becomes easily something else to do rather than someone to know. And I think we have to realize that, and you've talked about this actually before the podcast today, is, I mean, what God wants is intimacy.
Yeah.
You know, he wants us close. I mean, he would not have sent Jesus if he just wanted to be some God who's way off, aloof, and not involved in our lives.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so I always believe this, that God is so much more interested in our heart than he is our behavior. And that sounds bad, but I think the reality is if God gets our heart, he's going to change our heart and our behavior is going to change.
Mm-hmm.
If we're in his word, our mind's going to be renewed. The decisions we make are going to change. And so the path of our life way is going to change.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of times what we do, and we mean it well, is we try to pick the bad fruit off of our life rather than allowing God to work at the root of our life. And until that root changes, the fruit's not going to change. And we can spend all of our life trying to pick that bad fruit off or trying to hide it from other people, but it's still going to be there. It's only really until God has our heart and he begins to work at a deep level in our heart and our soul, that becomes consistent. We can modify our behavior for a while.
Sure we can. Yeah.
But,
I think,
but it can't be consistent.
you know, I think the best example of us modifying our behavior is Sunday mornings.
Oh gosh, everybody's a saint on Sunday morning.
Yeah. You know,
Everybody lies on Sunday morning.
Uh-oh.
Because, I mean, think about this. You walk in and you're like, hey, how's it going? Man, we're doing great.
Right.
Knowing, like, some of these people that are saying that, like, their life's falling apart.
Yeah.
But church becomes the one place we feel like we can't be vulnerable when it should be the place that we can be the most vulnerable.
Right. Yeah. The point of being there, of worshiping,
Yeah.
right? It's not a social event.
Right.
You know, and I think that, you know, I look back on, I grew up going to church.
Yeah.
My parents had me in church. It was a big part of our lives. You know, we were involved in stuff that would happen throughout the week and things like that. But it never really connected with me.
Sure.
You know, I didn't really understand it. It was like, yeah, okay, you know, and going to church has changed a lot over the years.
Yeah.
You know, it used to be that, you know, the men were there and they were all in suit and ties, and you know, you were picking up a hymn book
That's
and you
right.
were singing these hymns, and you know, which is,
And nothing wrong with that.
yeah, that's great. You know, I mean, there's still some churches like that, and that's fine. I'm not sitting here, you know, wanting to beat up a church, so to speak. But there was this idea of I almost like this perfection that you had to obtain somehow. And, you know, when you're young, you don't interact with people that much outside of like going to school and stuff like that, you know, and seeing where people are at. And then as you get older, you get to interact with folks.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
hey, you were at church Sunday. You heard what our pastor said, and what you're doing right now is not consistent with that. You know, what happened, you know?
And that's extremely impactful on a young person in general, but especially an unbeliever.
Yeah.
And it obviously impacts a believer too, but for an unbeliever, it just really is a turn off when there's such and there's going to be some inconsistency in our life because we're not perfect. But when there's no consistency in our life that's in line with God's truth, like that's a pretty big turnoff for people. And I think that's one reason that people have rejected the church in a lot of ways is it's got a little bit of my experience is what I saw when I started going to church with my girlfriend, who's now my wife, is I was like, I don't need this to live like I live. Like, this is not going to change how I live because the focus was on the wrong thing. And so what I saw actually turned me away rather than drawing me in.
What was some of the stuff that you saw that was doing that?
Well, it was seeing people live two completely different lives. And it's one of the things as, leading a church, pastoring a church, it's one of the things I've never wanted for my kids. But again, I'm not perfect. So they know the worst of me, right? My wife knows the worst of me. But I never want there to be such a huge gap between the person on the stage on Sunday morning and the person that they live with Monday through Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but what I saw so much of was the inconsistencies. And it wasn't trying to hold people to a perfect standard or really even looking for, what people will say a lot of times is hypocrisy, right? It was one example is as I went to church, and I only went just to be with my girlfriend.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, and
I
so
did the
I'd
same
go
thing.
and sit and listen, and I'm just like, oh gosh, when can we go eat lunch? And my stomach's growling, and so, but what I started seeing was, everybody was dressed up, and I've always said this, after I got saved, it's like everybody went and they got cleaned up, they put on their best pants, their best shirt, their best jacket, and their best mask, and they came to church. And so I'm watching all the people who were, these people who were somebody in the community, and I'm like, well, I guess if I'm going to be somebody in the community, I need to do what they're doing. And so I thought one way I can do that is I'll usher, so, some of the somebodies in the community ushered. And so I was like, that's something I'll do. I'll usher. And so I got the right clothes. I didn't grow up going to church. And so I got the right clothes. I started ushering, and then we would go back. They'd count out the money, put it in a bag, put it in a safe, and then most of them left. Like, they didn't stay for the service or the rest of the service. Went to the golf course, whatever. Nothing wrong with golf, but it's like, all right, like, what was the point of that?
Mm-hmm.
Just to check a box and say I went to church, just to say, hey, I served a little bit, just to be seen. I mean, like, I don't know what the purpose of it was, but for me, it was a huge turnoff from the standpoint of I don't need religion if this is what it is. I don't need God if this is what this is about. Like, this is the most fake thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And so it really, made me where I became very critical. I still think about one poor lady that she tried so hard with my age group and to really lead us in Bible studies, but I was that jerk that just went to the Bible study to ask the questions that you couldn't answer and that really are stupid, like, can God make a rock so big that he can't move it, kind of thing, and I mean, just to be a turd, you know what I mean? And so that was me. And so I was very cynical of God. I had some events with, my girlfriend had cancer when she was 16. I had a cousin who died of cancer when he was 16. There were some events in my life that it really made me hard-hearted towards God. And the fear of hell never really moved me close to God. I was like, kind of in my mind, like, if that's where he wants me to go, which, side note, God never sends anybody to hell. They choose that.
Yeah.
And so I really was like, fear of hell doesn't make me want to live for God. I don't, if that's his heart that he wants to send me to hell, then I want to serve him anyway. And so that never worked. And my view of God was so jaded by what I saw and some life experiences. And it was not until I encountered the love of Christ that my life changed. But when I encountered the love of Jesus and I realized that as bad as I had been towards him, as much as I had even cursed his name and made fun of people who followed him, he still wanted me. And when I realized that, the day I got saved, there's a guy preaching. He became a good friend of mine, and he's talking about every sin I was doing. And I'm getting mad, right? I'm like, who is this guy to tell me how I ought to live? And so I was literally getting ready to get up and leave. And as I started to push my chair back, I just felt this impression in my mind that said, why don't you shut up and listen to him? And in that moment, I can't explain it. In that moment, I realized all I have to do is turn. And when I did, God was there. And I was like, why? Why would he still be there for me?
Yeah.
When I've done all this against him? It was almost like Paul on the road to Damascus. Like, when Paul is blinded by that light and he says, who are you, Lord? Like, the last thing he wanted to hear was, I'm Jesus. Because in that moment, he had to think, I'm a dead man.
Oh, yeah, I'm undone.
Yeah. But instead of killing him, Jesus gave him life. And that's what I felt like. It's like, I deserve to die, and yet he's made me more alive than I've ever been. And so it was the love of God that changed my life. And I think about one of my favorite verses is 2 Corinthians 5:14, where Paul says, Christ's love compels us. Because Jesus died for all, and I'm one of those all. And but now to be compelled by God's love is so much different than being compelled by some legalistic burden, and it's such a different thing. And the intimacy of God and the presence of God is something that I never want to lose now. Whereas before I could have cared less, I didn't want religion. I wanted a relationship, and that was what was in my heart. I just didn't know it.
Mm-hmm.
And and I was telling you earlier, when I went from one day, being very cynical of God and Jesus, and the next day I didn't understand why everybody wasn't wanting to follow Jesus. And so I went from being destructive from a standpoint of cynicism to being destructive from a standpoint of legalism.
Oh, man.
And I was one of these people that, like, if the speed limit was 35, I was going 34.
I've never been that guy.
Yeah. Thank God you haven't. And I would.
Now, wait. I've been legalistic about stuff. Now, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I have messed up with what it means, what God's grace really means.
Sure,
but I've never been that guy that says, "Oh, the speed limit's 35. I'm going 34." I've never been that guy.
But that's how bad it got. And I'm not advocating for the fact that grace gives us the right to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
But what I am advocating is what it says in Titus, that grace teaches us to say no to ungodliness. And so when it's the relationship that changes us. And so, but I was so legalistic, man. I was so destructive. I had a passion for the Lord, but and a zeal, but I had no wisdom. And I was really like a bull in a china shop, man. And I think I did way more harm than good in those days. And it finally came to a head one night, and I was getting worn out and exhausted from trying to be perfect. And it finally came to a head one night where my wife and I were eating at the dinner table. I didn't get saved. I was 24, and we're eating one night, and she had fixed like cube steak, mashed potatoes, and peas, which makes me really hungry right now. And so she had cooked, and we're sitting at the dinner table, and as usual, I'm complaining about people who claim to be Christians but aren't living like Christians. And she said, Brandon, we just have to love them and be patient. And I remember I slammed my hand down on the table. I mean, just like as hard as I could. And I said, that's not good enough. And when I did, there's like English peas rolling across the table. And we kind of both just looked at each other like, okay, that's over the top. And I realized that I was kind of at this crossroads of, I'm either going to have to accept God's grace and that he did for me what I can't do for myself, or I'm not going to make it. And that was a defining moment in my life. And there were a couple of books I read. Like one of them was What's So Amazing About Grace by Philip Yancey. And that book really impacted my life to help me understand grace and to help me escape this performance trap of legalism that robs us of joy. I think about Galatians 2, where Paul says, I do not set aside the grace of God.
Mm-hmm.
For if righteousness could be, or justification could be attained through the law, Christ died for nothing.
For nothing, that's right.
Oh, man, what a crazy statement to think that Jesus died for nothing, and how arrogant of me to think that I could make his death ineffective because of my ability. It's like, how could I ever possibly think that way? But I did.
Yeah, making little of the cross by doing that.
Gosh,
right?
man. Yeah.
Yeah. And even to talk about the cross, so we have this interaction, this dialogue that happens literally while Christ is hanging on the cross.
Oh yeah.
With the thief that's there, and by God's grace, he saved him in that moment when the thief recognized that Jesus was who he was.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
And, so we get legalistic on this idea of understanding the doctrine of sanctification and going through and reading our entire Bible. And we should, I mean,
absolutely.
You don't want to run up on Zephaniah when you're in heaven one day and him go, hey, how'd you like my book? And you'll be like, you wrote a book? I didn't see,
See, and that response is kind of like the response to the book I wrote. I wrote a book called A Better Story.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's that's everybody else's response to me.
When you ask.
Like, you wrote a book? And so it's funny, every now and then I'll look at my bank account and it'll say like deposit of $250 or whatever. And I'm like, where did that come from? And it'll say content distribution. I'm like, somebody bought a book. But yeah, you don't want to get there, and it's like, so how'd you like, what the Holy Spirit inspired me to write? And you're like, tell me who you are again.
Yeah, right. Yes, I mean, yes. So we should read our Bible. It's there. It is our manual for life,
sure.
Right? And then this interaction like you and I are having right now.
Yeah.
It's how we're taking what we've gone through and we've read, and how the Holy Spirit is helping us to understand it, and then we talk through it together with another believer to come to a place where we understand it better, so we can grow closer to God. Like his goal through the whole thing is us having intimacy with him.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can go back and look at the story of creation. How God made everything, the order that he made everything in. And he made this world so we would have a domain to live in. Yeah. And he did that because out of his love for us, right? Think about bringing a new baby home from the hospital, or welcoming a new child into your life.
Yeah.
You make preparation to do that.
Yeah.
That's right. You don't just not prepare for it.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, of course there are times where, maybe some people prepare a lot.
That's right.
And maybe some people just make sure they have somewhere for the thing to sleep, right?
The thing.
But regardless, you try to prepare.
So I heard you had a thing. Congratulations.
Yeah. Congratulations on the thing there. That thing. But anyway, it's it's when we look at that, we can gain a better understanding of how much he loves us.
Absolutely. Right.
That he created a place for us that was perfect, by the way. Yeah. And just it's overwhelming.
It really
to think about. It truly is overwhelming to think about. You know, I did a Bible study, I guess is the best way to what to call it. When I was younger, I was in my 20s, and I did it by myself, and it was designed to go through with other people, but
Yeah.
I just, didn't have the opportunity to go through it with other people, so I went through it by myself. And it was called Experiencing God.
Yes.
By
that.
Blackaby. And man, that brought about a radical change in my life.
That's cool.
Because a really close friend of mine, he was my pastor at the time. His name's Wes Moy.
Yeah,
He,
I know Wes real
he
well.
did more for my spiritual development
Yeah.
than anybody has in my entire life. And that's not to say, somebody else wasn't trying or didn't do the things that they should do. God had him in a place at a time where I was listening.
Yeah.
Like I had been brought to a place where I was like, okay, this is supposed to be different.
Yeah, there was a kind of a hunger.
Yeah.
New hunger there.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Wes came alongside me, and man, he helped to grow me in ways that I didn't even know were possible.
Yeah.
And I remember going through that study and just this radical change that I had in my life about, what it even looks like.
Yeah.
Cause I had no clue, man.
Yeah.
I was just going through life. I was just happy to be there,
Yeah. Well, and it's a little bit daunting and can be intimidating, right? When you look at the Bible, and I'm looking at yours right now, there's a lot of pages there.
Yeah, sure.
And to begin to read, and I know for me, it was almost like Scripture was just a bunch of disjointed thoughts. And so I didn't realize that it all told one story. And you mentioned creation. And, it begins in a perfect place, and when you get to the end of the Bible, it ends in a perfect place. And everything in between is how God brings it back to the perfection that he desired, and how he rescues the world and redeems the world and brings it back to what he wants it to be. But until you really start reading it, and especially in community with other people, it doesn't start connecting. And what I found is the longer you read the Bible, it's like these dividers begin to come out of Scripture, and it all begins to connect. And you begin to see, okay, this isn't separated from this. This is actually connected to this. And it all begins to be one story of all these books written by 40 and plus authors that tells one story about one man who would come to redeem and reconcile the earth and the entire creation back to the Father. And like the odds of that, the coincidence of that, it takes more faith to me now to not believe it's true than to believe it is true.
Well, that's like, to look at creation and to believe that it came from a mud puddle.
Oh gosh, man. Yeah.
That takes.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to push somebody away, but at the same time, it's like, man, I can't
go there.
I can't fathom that. I can't understand that. How did all these things come from, this single cell
and
thing?
Even that's a leap of faith because it's not fully explainable.
Right.
Like it's not like it's a foolproof scientific thing that we know this happened. There's still missing parts to it. They still don't understand aspects of it. Like, how did this happen? We believe this happened, but how did this happen? We can't even predict the weather for tomorrow. How are you going to tell me what happened 10 million years ago?
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like, I have a harder time believing that than I do when I look at creation. For me to believe that there's a creation without a creator, that borderlines on just sticking my head in the sand and denying what's obvious.
I think so. Yeah, I think it does too. I'm reading a book right now by Lee Strobel.
Yes.
It's called "Is God Real?" I think is the title of the book. It's I just started reading it, but man, he was I want to say this right. I think he was an investigative journalist
Maybe in Chicago.
in Chicago. Yeah. And has a background in law to some degree, maybe some training in law, and he takes it from a very, it either is or it isn't kind of standpoint.
And I love that. Like,
man, it's it's been really cool to read through so far.
Yeah, Lee Strobel, I believe, that he wrote the Case for Christ. He's written. There's a whole series of books he's written, and I love it because the way he approaches it from that investigative standpoint. But I believe this is correct, that he started out to disprove Christianity,
right? Yeah,
and ended up convincing himself that it was true.
Well, he looked at it from I mean, he was investigating it.
Yeah.
And I wish I had the book with me right now. I'd share, his he has a 20-word prayer. He encourages everybody to pray. Yeah. He said, even if you don't know who you're praying to, ask this prayer. And it's like, man, I wish I had it. I'll have to post something up on some social media somewhere. I'll put it in the comments of the podcast here. But it was just, basically, if you're real and you want me to know you, help me to see.
That's right.
Basically, is kind of the spirit of the prayer.
Yeah.
And he just invites people to come to the table and look at the evidence. You know, he's like, listen, I'm not trying to convince you one way or the other. Yeah. I went into this thinking that I was going to prove that there was not a God.
Yeah.
That's how he started out his quest.
Right.
He was going to prove there was not. Yeah. And he said the evidence just is overwhelming. Yeah, it's exactly right. So I would definitely, I'm not all the way through the book.
Yeah.
But I've read enough of it to say I would recommend that book.
Yeah. And if you want to start with a really short read about that, there's a book called More Than a Carpenter. And it's a really small book, but it talks about the evidence for Jesus and the proof of Jesus's life, death, and resurrection, and so many things undeniable. Christianity is really, to me, the only religion you don't have to check your mind at the door to believe. It's also the only religion that doesn't tell us we have to work our way to God. That God came to us.
Right? Yeah, it's a completely different.
But yeah, I mean, Christianity has and does stand up to the toughest criticisms. And so it's something that our intellect doesn't have to be separated from our faith when it comes to Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've talked about lessons from the season. Yeah. We've talked about how we need to make pivots throughout hunting season and what that looks like. And because we have a goal in mind, our goal is to harvest, to put meat on the table, right? And to have fruit from our labor. And then we've looked at how you and I both have need to make pivots in our lives and in the way we approach God, the way we view God, right? And realizing that although we're chasing an animal out there, we don't have to chase God because He's not moving. Right. He is where He is, and He invites us to come to Him.
Yes.
Right. Yes. In fact, He pursues us.
Right. Yeah, that poem is called "The Hound of Heaven."
Yeah,
and it talks about God's pursuit of us. I think that is such an incredible thing, especially as a hunter and someone who loves dogs, is to picture God as the Hound of Heaven who is in pursuit of His people that He loves. Because I know, if it were me, man, like after day 7. they eat that fruit, man, I'm like, I'm just blowing that thing up. I'm like, it only took me 7 days to make it. I'll just make a new one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, he didn't. He continued to pursue, and he had a plan from before the creation to reconcile it back to himself.
Yeah.
And it's so amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is overwhelming to me to look at it. It's overwhelming to understand the holiness of God, how he is set apart. He's completely different. He is separate from creation because he is the creator, right? I mean, we can think about making something, getting a piece of wood and making something.
Yeah.
Well, I never become a part of that
That's right.
creation,
That's
right?
right.
Because I made it.
Yeah.
So that is kind of a way to look at the holiness of God, is that he's not bound by time like we are.
Right.
It's it can sometimes feel confusing to go through it and to look at it, but at the basis of it all, what we need to understand is he loves us and wants that relationship with us.
That's right.
Period. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's something that we need to look at. One of my favorite verses is from the book of Titus. And if you want a book to pick up and read, read Titus.
Right.
It's 3 chapters. It's short, and it is rich with how to live.
Yes.
Right? And in the book of Titus, in chapter 3, he says, remind them to be subject to rulers and authorities, to obey, to be ready for every good work, to speak evil of no one, to be peaceable, gentle, showing all humility to all men. And then this is where it really hits the road. It says, for we ourselves were also once foolish, disobedient, deceived, serving various lusts and pleasures, living in malice and envy, hateful and hating one another. But when the kindness and the love of God our Savior toward man appeared, everything changed, right?
Yeah.
But God stepped in, and so when we look at that, idea of church and what we expect it to be, and whether we expect it that we should go in suit and ties and be picking up a hymn book and singing and worshiping God in that way, or if we go in wearing a t-shirt and blue jeans.
That's right.
What God's looking at is our heart.
That's it.
That's what he sees. And if we want to be men and women after God's heart, what our desire should be is to love what God loves and hate what God hates.
That's right.
God hates evil.
Yeah.
God loves people.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's that it can be distilled down to that simple of a concept.
Yeah.
He loves people so much that he created a place for us to live. He loved people so much that he sacrificed his son to bridge that gulf that there was nothing we could ever do to reach him, because he's set apart, because he's holy and we are sinful, right? So something had to happen. So if we can distill it down to that point, to where we love people and we hate and we shun evil, it'll change the way we look at life. I know it has for me.
Yeah. I mean, even Jesus taking all the law and prophets and summarizing it into two commands of love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor.
Love your neighbor.
Pretty much exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
And he made it so simple. Not that it's easy, but with him it's possible.
Yeah.
Without him, it's not.
Yep. That's right. All right. Well, good deal. We're going to wrap it up there. Thank you guys so much for listening. And we had a good time talking about this stuff this morning, and really looking at how we can apply so much of life to, whether it be hunting or whatever it is, how it all is connected, and it gives us an opportunity to grow in our relationships with each other, and definitely to grow in our relationship with God, and just looking for, being intentional about how we go through life, right? That's kind of the point of our discussion today, is when we are intentional about things, the way that it changes everything about who we are, and what God's desire is for our life, and what our desire should be for our life and for the lives of others. So we appreciate you guys listening, and follow along, comment in the comment section down in the podcast notes there. You can comment there, or you can comment on social media, and let us know what you want us to be talking about, any topics that you want us to look at, any questions that you've got about anything that we've said. Brandon and we're an open book on this stuff. If you want to, even if you're here local and you want to come sit down and talk with us, man, reach out, and let's do it, because we want to be intentional about this, and we're thankful for the opportunity to come into your day with this discussion. So thanks again for listening, guys. God bless, and we'll catch you next time.